judged yourselves poorly.
Are you guys proud of a system where a man cannot defend himself? Are you proud of it?
One of the most horrific things I've ever seen in the whole time I was a policeman.
No way of turning back.
In 1969, notorious criminal and cult leader Charles Manson orchestrated the killings of 7 individuals in Los Angeles. The murder spread panic and fear throughout the area and pushed Doris Tate, the mother of victim Sharon Tate, to advocate for the rights of crime victims and their families. This led to the creation of the victims' rights laws, which were a monumental turning point for crime survivors, allowing them to be recognized and protected by the U.S. justice system. Because of these laws, victims and their families today have the right to be informed, present, and heard during crime proceedings. What started as an unknown cult would soon lead to some of the United States' most infamous crimes, sending America into a decade of anxiety and changing the U.S. justice system forever. That series of crimes would become known as the Manson murders. Charles Manson was a troubled child from the start. Born to a father he never met and a mother who was sent to prison when he was just 5 years old, Manson had a dark childhood. He lived in West Virginia with his aunt and uncle for 3 years. When his mother was paroled, Manson's family moved to Charleston, West Virginia, and later Indianapolis. Charles Manson, lacking any stability in his life, resorted to several violent acts. According to Manson himself, at the age of 9, he set his school on fire. He would go on to get in trouble for numerous other things, subsequently being placed in a school for male delinquents called Gabalt School for Boys. Eventually, he fled to Indiana, where he would commit his first known crime of robbing a grocery store. From that moment on, Manson would commit several armed robberies and other crimes, spending the rest of his childhood in and out of various juvenile facilities and institutions. On March 1st, 1967, just 2 years before the murders would take place, Charles Manson was released from federal prison for the second time. Just over a few months after his release, Charles Manson founded a cult later known as the Manson family. The Manson family began as a communal religious cult, which Manson created as an attempt to manipulate people into following his religious teachings. For the most part, Manson's targets were young women, especially those who were insecure or felt like outcasts to society. Manson frequently used drugs or sexual abuse to exploit his followers. Members of the cult testified that Manson encouraged group LSD trips, further eroding their sense of self. In 1968, the Manson family settled in Spahn Ranch, a remote location in California. It was around this same time that Manson became fixated on the idea that there was going to be an upcoming apocalypse. He believed that a race war between the black and white populations in America was inevitable, calling the supposed war Helter Skelter. Manson told his followers that to survive this doomsday, they needed to be the ones to jumpstart the war. Their way of doing this, according to cult member Susan Atkins, was to commit a crime that would shock the world. On the night of August 9th, 1969, Tex Watson took 3 other members of the Manson cult, Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, and Patricia Krenwinkel, to 150 CeeLo Drive in Los Angeles, California. There were 6 people in the Tate residence that night: pregnant actress Sharon Tate, her friend Jay Sebring, Wojciech Frykowski, Abigail Folger, William Garretson, and Stephen Parent. The 4 cult members arrived at the house just past midnight. Watson climbed a telephone pole in front of the entrance and cut the phone line. Then, Watson, Atkins, and Krenwinkel approached the house while Kasabian kept watch down by the gate. At the same time, Stephen Parent was driving up to the guest house to visit his friend William Garretson. Seeing this, Watson aimed his gun at Stephen and shot him 4 times in the chest, killing him. Watson then broke in through a window on the side of the main house and entered the living room, letting Krenwinkel and Atkins in through the front door. The cult members rounded up Sebring, Folger, Frykowski, and Tate and tied Sebring and Tate together. Sebring protested their rough treatment of Tate and was shot and stabbed by Watson. Meanwhile, Frykowski and Folger managed to free themselves and flee the house. Before they could escape, however, they were both chased down and killed by Watson and Krenwinkel. Inside the house, Sharon Tate begged Atkins to take her hostage and let her live long enough to have the baby, but it was no use. Both Atkins and Watson stabbed her to death. The following night, The four murderers, plus Charles Manson, Leslie Van Houten, and Clem Grogan, drove to the home of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. Watson and Manson entered the house through an unlocked back door. Manson stabbed Lino with a bayonet a total of 12 times. Rosemary was stabbed by Van Houten, Krenwinkel, and Manson. After they left, there may have been a plan for a third murder the next day, but Caspian later claimed she stopped this attempt by deliberately knocking on the wrong door. Initially, the social and psychological impacts of the Tate-LaBianca murders were immense. On August 9, 1969, after the bodies were discovered, the Tate murders became national news. Word of the murders spread like wildfire, and with no suspects in custody, people in LA began to panic. According to a 1985 thesis by Judith Elaine Bullis, in 2 days, a Beverly Hills sporting goods store sold 200 firearms. They averaged 3 or 4 such sales per day before the murders. Guard dogs were selling for $1,500 that had previously sold for $200, and supplies quickly ran out. The Tate murders were originally believed to be the result of a drug transaction. Because of this, detectives were quick to rule out that the Tate and LaBianca murders could be connected, even knowing the similarities between the crimes. On August 16th, the sheriff's office raided Spahn Ranch and arrested Manson and the rest of the family for a reason completely unrelated to the murders. The cult was suspected of a major auto theft ring. Their weapons were seized, but because the search warrant was outdated, the family was released a few days later. However, while in jail, Susan Atkins bragged to her cellmates about the Tate murders, subsequently pulling the string loose to the series of murders. The rest of the family was soon arrested and brought to trial. Around the same time, the beginning of the victims' rights movement was just starting to take place. Stemming from feminist movements in the 1960s and 1970s, victims of crime were beginning to realize the mistreatment they were facing in the criminal justice system. Many surviving crime victims and their families were denied the chance to speak at sentencing and commonly had no access to compensation or services to help them piece their lives back together. The voices of crime activists continued to be silenced for years until the Manson murders pushed an unlikely hero into the forefront of the movement. After the murders, Doris Tate, the mother of victim Sharon Tate, was still working through the loss of her daughter. Devastated, she wanted to do as much as she could to make sure the Manson family was held responsible to the fullest extent of the law. Unfortunately, due to the lack of support for crime victims, she too was nearly unable to participate in the trial surrounding her daughter. When murderer Leslie Van Houten began petitioning the California Board of Prison with over 900 signatures supporting her release, Doris Tate decided she'd had enough. Not only did Doris Tate combat Van Houten's petition by getting over 350,000 signatures against her parole, but she also began to work tirelessly to ensure that she and other families of crime victims would be able to have a voice in cases regarding their loved ones. The ongoing media coverage surrounding the Manson murders gained massive attention for Doris Tate's mission. This awareness sparked outrage for her and other crime victims who were being unsupported and ignored by the U.S. justice system. After founding the Coalition on Victims' Equal Rights, or COVER, Doris went on to talk shows to raise awareness of the faults in the correction system, along with serving on the California State Advisory Committee on Correctional Services. The culmination of these efforts was the passage of California Proposition 8, the Victims' Bill of Rights, in 1982. If passed, this bill would allow victims of crime the right to be notified of, to attend, and to give their perspective during criminal proceedings, a major turning point in victims' rights. It would be the first time a victim statement would be allowed during sentencing and parole hearings, which can provide crucial information to cases that may have never been considered before. With the help of Doris Tate and the rest of the victims' rights movement, the bill was passed, and Doris would go on to be the first person to give a victim impact statement at a parole hearing. Doris Tate's legacy would continue to live on through the movement, eventually pushing all 50 states to implement victim compensation programs and bills. Along with this, 33 states have successfully passed victims' rights amendments to their state constitutions, solidifying surviving crime victims' abilities to advocate for themselves to this day. It's now been over 50 years since the murders, and the aftermath has had lasting impressions in both negative and positive ways. While the Manson murders will go down in history as one of America's most notorious crimes, the actions made because of them were undoubtedly a crucial turning point for anyone affected by crime in the United States. The rights of surviving crime victims in the US are in a massively better state than they were, and, due to the impact of the murders in Doris Tate, will continue to be improved for decades to come.